Um, I'm going to ask you some question lighthearted. We'll see if it's lighthearted, but I think they are because there are lots of people interested. So last year, I believe Nikki has some reports about Germany. So German museum dig into legacy of Boxer rebellion looting, and then it says a joint review of holdings of Chinese scholars to lead to return of artifacts. Okay, that's one.
Yeah.
Okay, next. Yeah. So Egypt wants the Rosetta Stone back from the British Museum. Okay, is it now time to heal the wounds inflicted by the colonial power? So this is, I think, last September. Now, recently, in March here, Greece welcomes return of ancient artifacts from Acropolis, kept by the Vatican for centuries, putting pressure on the British Museum to hand back sculptures. So I guess it's they're talking about marble sculptures. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I want to know the general public feeling about the British Museum, all those artifacts, right? They are plenty coming from all over the world during the colonial era. And then you, as a Greek, how do you feel about that?
Well, I should first of all declare an interest. My aunt, when she was Minister of Culture in Greece back in the 1980s, was at the forefront of the campaign to get the marbles returned to Greece. So I mean, I have those particular feelings. But can I say generally? I mean, how does the British public in general feel? Well, the British public, just as we've discussed before, they find it very difficult to understand that other nations might feel unhappy about the fact that all their most important and valuable artifacts were plundered by the European colonial powers in the period that they were. I mean, this is something that they find very difficult to understand. And I think they're against it. They're against returning these things because, they say, well, we have them now, so they're ours. And we don't want to see the British Museum broken up. We don't want to see the Louvre broken up. We don't want to see the Berlin museums broken up. We don't want any of those things. And of course, in Britain, it's particularly important. It's a particularly touchy issue because, of course, Britain was the biggest colonial power. It was in the 19th century when these collections were amassed. It was the world's most powerful country. So it has amassed treasures in London and across Britain on a scale that you cannot imagine. Now, can I just say, that for some reason, the British had very selective ideas about Chinese art. So they weren't interested in Chinese painting, which they didn't understand. But we still, if you go around Britain, if you go to British houses, the big houses, you still find lots of items of Chinese porcelain taken in the wars of 1860, in the so-called Boxer Rebellion, which wasn't a rebellion, by the way. How could it be when the Empress supported it? I mean, it wasn't a rebellion, but never mind. Let's not get into the details of all of that. Yeah. But anyway, Britain is gorged with all of these artworks, all of these treasures. I mean, if you go to the Percival David Foundation, a museum very few people in China, I think, or at least the world know about. So one of the most extraordinary collections of Chinese porcelain you will find outside China. It is extraordinary what they have, including an awful lot of Sung Dynasty porcelain. And I believe there's one type of Sung Dynasty porcelain of which at one time, half the items in the world were in this museum because
what's the name again?
Percival David.
David
So,
Museum. Okay.
As I said, Britain is stuffed with this sort of thing. So at some point, the Western powers, the colonial powers, need to come to some kind of reckoning about this. They need to understand that, this didn't come freely. It was taken. I mean, if you go into a country and you seize things and you bring them back and plunder them, be they Benin bronzes or Chinese porcelain or British Elgin marbles. I mean, they always say, well, Elgin paid for the marbles, but he bought them in a very corrupt way, actually. And he wouldn't have been able to do that if he hadn't been the British ambassador in the Ottoman court. So you are never going to come to terms with the fact that your empire has gone if you hold on to the proceeds in that sort of fashion. Yes. And that's something that, as I said, I don't think the European publics have internalized at all.
Yeah, and some of those artifacts really has a lot of the cultural history significance, right? Those marbles are, and I think some Egyptian artifacts really has maybe even their religious, significance, and of course in China those things has a lot of history, right? The historical significance. Yeah.
Well, they have enormous significance, of course. The British don't always, or the British or the French or the Germans or whoever, don't always understand the significance that some of these artworks have to the culture that they've been taken from. But of course, they don't also understand that the manner in which they were taken can also be an open wound. I mean, you don't have to spend much time studying the history of China to understand that the way in which the country was plundered, for example, in those expeditions, the one of 1860, when the Summer Palace was destroyed, by the way, I think it was the son of Lord Elgin who stole the marbles. So it's the father stole the marbles, the son burnt down the Summer Palace. Just saying. But anyway, this is also an open wound for many of these societies. Now, I don't want to say that all of the art that's come to us has come through plunder. Some of it perhaps was bought in a legitimate way, but even that begs questions, because if you're a wealthy British collector in Shanghai in 1900 buying porcelain, you're going to have a very different kind of pull than you will have a kind of ability to get things which you might not do if you were just a collector, if I can put it like that.
You understand that the interest of this, it is from time to time there's always talking about is it time to put pressure. I think that the related is the royal family. They own those diamonds and with the coronation. So I think both South Africa and India has been asking those diamonds, but it's a different deal, right? Those diamonds belongs to the royal family, not the British Museum. Is that right? So
that is absolutely correct. They're in fact, I believe, technically, they're property of the British Crown, which is a separate entity from the individual who is the king. But anyway, whatever. I mean, the fact is, I don't think we need to spend too much time debating this. The point is, they're owned by the British state. Remember, the British Museum is also owned by the British state. So it's different. It's different parts of the British state that owns all of these things, and they are a legacy of empire. I mean, I talked about the things that the British took from China. Because, well, I mean, you're from China, so we have that connection. But I mean, in India, it's even worse. The British directly ruled India. I mean, the amount of things they took from India and the amount of destruction they did in India was proportionately much greater. I mean, if you go to Delhi and you visit the fort, the Red Fort in Delhi, it's what most people don't know is that what you see today is only a remnant of what had been there before the British destroyed it. So it's this whole complicated history which the British have never acknowledged or accepted. This is one of the interesting things about Westerners. If they did something, but it happened 50, 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago, well, that's history. We don't worry about that. That's in the past. If it happens today to us or to people we support, well, then it's outrageous. It's monstrous. It's an entirely inappropriate and terrible thing.
Well, that's all I have for today. It's more than 1.5 hours. So I spent lots of your time. So thank you so much.
No, my enormous pleasure. I have to say, I enjoy these 1.5 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I ask you all kinds of questions you might not get, like the British Museum, but I guess you're probably interested. It's a big topic. It's always been a big topic in China, certainly.
Well, absolutely. It's a very big topic in Greece. I mean, it's
Okay.
as I said, my aunt was at the forefront of it, but it is a thing that people talk about in Greece. It may not be something that people talk about in the cafes and bars here in London, but they do in Athens. So I mean, that gives you again a sense of the difference in outlook. The British want to keep these things, but they don't really have that same sort of connection to them that people in Greece do, because it is a part of our heritage.